All right, Rod and I are back with We Want Winners. I have to apologize because we were ready to go last weekend. I'd gotten home from Arizona to see my kid graduate, and I realized that if we were going to stay on that same 2 week schedule that we like to stay on, I was going to be gone again next week because I'm headed out to Las Vegas next week. So I was like, let's hold it off 1 week. Let's get back on a good 2 week cycle. And here we are. But that is my fault. Rod was ready to go. He sent me some notes, and I was like, oh, I don't want to screw this up, but we'll be okay. Well, I think we can be on a pretty good rotation from here on out. There may be a time where we need to move
Family
things up
first.
or move it back. Yeah, exactly.
Family first.
Exactly. So, but how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm doing very good. This off season, the NFL, they've got a racket going. It's never really the off season for the NFL. It's great for football nerds like me.
Of
I
course.
couldn't can you it was awesome. We didn't really get to touch on it because we weren't here, but how they like stretched out the schedule released up to like a 3-day event. It was awesome.
There was so many blog posts and news stories about, when are the Niners going to play this team, and I was just like, man, it's great because it gives us something to talk about, but I don't know how good the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be in Week 11 right now. I'm not
Mm-mm.
sure right now, and so I don't know if I have a great take now. But you know what's always interesting about the 49ers schedule? Because the home stadium has a sun problem during the hottest time, they play a lot of their early games on the road, and then when they do come back to play a home game during that early September or mid-September timeframe, it's usually like a night game, and those are my favorite games to go to at Levi's. By the way, it's awesome to watch a game there in the evening. But so they can't really get off to a slow start on the road because historically they always start on the road, and that is what is going on here for them with week one in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's an interesting start. And I think, I don't think I know they kind of got screwed in the way that they set up their schedule in that they only have the one trip, which the way it sets up with the Cleveland Minnesota back to back, that's a Youngstown game that they'll be staying in Youngstown for sure, the week in between. But I thought that the league might be generous to them and give them at least one more of those twofers. But nope. I mean, they've got like 4 trips where they're like back to the East Coast and
Yep.
back to the West Coast, and then back to so that's why they are like second in the league to Seattle, who
Yeah.
always gets screwed in
Yeah.
mileage in terms of travel just based on where they're at. We're like second this year because of the fact that we have those East Coast trips and they didn't bundle them together for us. So we'll see. Hopefully, I mean, hope it doesn't matter. I mean, and it's not like the old NBA where they're like traveling on trains and buses and things. I mean, they
Exactly.
are flying private. So I guess it's not that big a deal, but I don't know. It's something to talk about. And the other thing I love about this time of year is everybody's going 15-2, which is great.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. I've already seen predictions for the Niners, what their record is going to be. So the one thing I always look for, and this is a new occurrence for us as football fans, is I always look for the Thursday games. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking to see how those Thursday games are set up. Now, the question for you here is, if you have a Thursday game, now the Niners have two. The first one is their first home game against the Giants. They're coming off of a Sunday day game in Los Angeles, so not far travel to come
Not
back.
bad. Mm-hmm.
And then they bring in, you bring in Danny Dimes and the Giants. would you rather have if you have a Thursday game, would you rather have it earlier in the season when maybe the team's not that beat up? I surely would not want it like later in the season
Yeah.
because, especially if you have some injuries historically the Niners have had, tons and tons of injuries. But what is your thoughts on the Thursday night games in general? Earlier, middle of the season, like when would you like to see those
I
games?
100% agree. Those are like the worst games to have like late in the season. I think those games. I don't agree with having them, but I mean they're here to stay now, and they're adding the Friday night games too. So I mean, this is not going away. They're not rolling this back. So it's here to stay. But I agree with you 100% that if you have to have them, it's better to have them earlier rather than late. And it's interesting that in the beginning they it kind of worked out where they were, and I guess that was because the slate started later in the season, that they were, those were mostly division games. It turned out, just because if you're going to start later in the season, the division games mean more. But since they're rolling those Thursday night games out, to start it off, it's interesting that we get the Giants first. And then what's the second one? I don't have the
The
schedule in
second
front of
one
me.
is this is actually, I think this works out well for them too. If we believe Seattle is going to be a good team and the Niners are going to be a good team, they both kind of get screwed because they have to play week 12. It's at Seattle. So always a tough one in
Yep.
Seattle. But the Niners come off of a home game against Tampa. I don't have the Seattle schedule to see
And that's
who they play before.
I
But
know
yeah,
our
that would be the other one.
our bye is 9, so it's after the bye. Yeah. So I mean that you're gonna talk about a tough game. Um, Going up there is always tough, but then on a short week, even more so. So
Well, here's a question I always wonder about when it comes to the schedules because the NFL, we are worried about player health and such. Why isn't every team that plays a Thursday night game? Why isn't their bye somewhat fixed into the week before or the week after? Because that would make a lot more sense if you're going to force a team
excuse me.
to play just 4 days after they had just played. Why would you not have their bye week intermixed into there so you can say, okay, yeah, you're going to play on 4 days rest, but guess what? Then your bye week and you have a whole lot of rest to get, or
Or
before that game,
yep.
then you have the bye and the other team who is playing in that game also has the bye to make it fair. I feel like that could happen, but I don't know why they don't prioritize that happening on these Thursday games.
Well, I think that might have been easier to do when those Thursday games like start. I can't remember, but it seems to me that though they started, like mid-season, and then they rolled forward, but now they're starting
Yeah,
early,
right
early.
away. Right away.
So I just think that there's too much inventory for that to happen. They just don't have enough buys. I mean,
Well, I mean, if like there are some teams who will not have a Thursday night game, I'm assuming there's some teams who are just like, we can't figure that one out. But of especially of the teams who have 2 Thursday night games, and I just have 2, and so you would at least hope that there would be some prioritization of their bye week on one of those Thursday night games. I don't know.
yeah,
Seems
that's
like
that is pretty extreme.
so by the way, Big Leo's got us going 13-4. And Big Leo is a fan of the base sports teams, and so I didn't expect anything less. Is that with Brock? Is that with Trey? Is that with a mix? Because when you tell me who's playing quarterback and how the quarterback is playing, then I probably can then figure out a prediction better. But Big Leo's already he's that's a great season right there, 13-4.
Absolutely. I mean, I kind of did some quick math, and like in the past 25 years, like 8% of the teams have won 13 or more games. So I mean, it's that's why the Niners number is a great number for the books, because at 12, I mean, you got to win 13 games to cover that number. And then there's just so much that can go wrong. Like we saw last season, how we got off to that slow start. You can't, if you're gonna go over 12, it can't, you got to start fast and you have to maintain it, because one loss here or there, and then you're right on the number. So yeah, I
Yeah.
yeah, I don't bet the Niners anyway, but that number, I'd have no interest at 12.
Well,
That's
the
just
the thing about it is when I was a kid and you had 16 games, and this was even before you had a bye week, I would always think, okay, the least amount of games the Niners are going to lose is when they're great. So,
mhm,
it was very easy. I was like, as long as they win 10 games, that is like the bottom barrel of the season that they would have is 10
mhm,
wins, because they were always 10 or 12 or 13. One year was 15-1, but now it's 17 games, and with the way that the NFL works today, where it does seem like, unless you are the worst of the worst franchises with the worst luck, you're going to have a good opportunity to compete. And I know that's what they want. I know that's what the owners want. I know that's what the commissioner wants, is everybody has a chance to compete. And if you tell me at the beginning of this season that the Niners will have 10 wins, to me, I'm in, because that means you're competing for the division and you more than likely get a wild card spot at 10 wins. Anything less than 10 wins, then it's up to a lot of math and a lot of luck and a lot of, who the competition is, and the teams that you're close to. So I just want 10. And if you give me 10, I'm happy. Anything more is gravy, I feel like.
Well, I agree 100% with you that from the league standpoint, they want everybody between 8 and 10. That is their dream scenario, is that everybody is bunched up in the middle, and at the end of the season there's this mad dash for the playoffs. You don't want a whole bunch of bad teams, but I don't think I think parity is what they are looking for. And um, you know, for the most part, they've got that. The league is really compacted. There aren't really, even the best of the best teams aren't, they're not really juggernauts like recall them back to when we were running the show. I mean, I just don't think, looking at the schedule right now, 15-2, I just don't see it. And like when you talk about those, 88, 89,
Yeah.
90, 91 teams, running the table for us was like a legit possibility. I mean, those teams, and then once Dallas got in the mix, those two teams were like clearly head and shoulders. And again, I go okay, and then Buffalo on the other side.
Yeah.
They were juggernauts. They were real. It wasn't really, you know, there was 2 or 3 years there where, the NFC Championship was the Super Bowl in
Yeah.
essence.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think from a league standpoint, they prefer it to be a muddled, bloody mess going into the final weeks of the season.
The other thing I thought about when I looked at the schedule was, who's playing on Sunday night? Because on Sunday night, at least it feels like they want one of the marquee games. Now, they're not always going to get the top marquee game. I know Monday Night Football this year is going to have a little bit better of a slate. And I know that, there's going to be some flexing going on with
And
Monday
they're
Night Football as well.
apparently they're starting that earlier and earlier, because I guess um Thursday night is going to get in the action on that, because Amazon got some dogs last year. And I mean,
Yes.
when you're paying all that money, I guess, you you want to keep your partners happy and have them have the ability to have at least a halfway decent slate. So, And then we got Friday night games now. It's crazy. This NFL thing is bananas.
Okay, so the Sunday night schedule, at least early on in the season, some of these matchups tell me who the NFL thinks is going to be much better than previous. Obviously, the Jets. They're in on
Mhm.
Rodgers. Rodgers to the
Yeah.
Jets is a big story for the NFL. So obviously
And I
him.
don't think that's a mistake because I know I
No,
hear a lot of people talking. They were not a real they weren't a horrible football team last year. Their defense is really good. They've got some real good. I know they took some hits on offense, like Hall got hurt, and then of course their quarterback stunk. But they've got some really good teams. They've got a really good. Their defense is legit.
yeah,
Um, and then
they were missing a quarterback,
yeah,
like a lot of teams.
and Rodgers, he was not up to Rodgers standards, but if he plays exactly like he did last season on this team, they're going to be a good football team.
Yeah, yeah. So the Jets obviously are leveling up. They play Kansas City on Sunday night in Week 4. Um, the Detroit Lions, of all teams, they have the opening Thursday night game against Kansas City. So the Super Bowl champs, the defending champions against the Lions. So the Lions are one of the teams that I think the NFL believes will be in the mix. Maybe they're a 9-win team or a 10-win team, but there is some there is some stuff behind the Lions. I'm
I'm in
sure
on
they're
them too.
I'm sure they're
I'm
a
in
little bit
on
of a
them.
dandy with the betters,
Mm-hmm.
with the over unders and such. So the Lions are another one. You're looking as I look down the line. There's definitely some interest in the Giants as well as the other New York team. The Chargers are another one. They believe in the young quarterback, and the Chargers actually leveling up. So I like to look at that.
It's time for them to put up or shut up because
Yeah,
there are a lot of quarterbacks in this league that would not get the pass that Herbert has gotten so
yeah.
far because they haven't done much of anything over the past 2 seasons. So it's time for them to, if he's everything that they say he is, it's time to put up or shut up, I think.
What do you think about the Black Friday game, which is, I believe it's an Amazon game, but I don't think you have to be a Prime customer. I think you can. I don't know how people would watch the game without Prime. Maybe there's a way. I know Amazon has like a freebie service, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a Black Friday game. They're competing for Christmas now with the NBA. There's a heavy slate of Christmas games. And the Niners play the Seahawks on Thanksgiving this year. Now there's a memorable game for Seahawks fans and a game that we would love to forget for 49ers fans when it came to Seattle. So the Thursday game that I mentioned, that is the Thanksgiving game. So that was a bad one for us. There also a Baltimore game that the Niners played on Thanksgiving. That was like a
Yeah.
really close battle. Was that the same year as the Super Bowl? I
Yeah.
forget.
Yep.
So Thursday, Thanksgiving time, not kind to us, but it'll kind of be fun. I like the idea of the Niners playing on Thanksgiving because a lot of times when on Thanksgiving, you're so tired from all the food and the game. If the game's not good, then you're out. So at
Right.
least I'll have to stay awake for the night because it's the night game. It's gonna be
Fire up the
after food.
coffee.
Yeah. So then there's also mentioned that Peacock is going to get one of the wild card games, probably whatever the worst one is. And so you'll only be able to watch if you have a Peacock subscription. So they're trying to drive some subscriptions to
Probably
Peacock as
that
well.
Saturday early game.
Yeah, exactly. Always if the Texans were in the playoffs, they get that game.
Yep.
The Jaguars, if they're in the playoffs, they get that game.
It's
So
like the NFL equivalent of the NBA TV games, which are
Yeah,
usually the
yeah,
playoff
for the
games. Are usually
playoffs.
like usually like Toronto or something and
Yeah,
somebody.
when they got to run like 3 games on a day, it's like one gets shoved over to NBA TV. But yeah, I am not in the business of trying to go game by game and go, oh, Steelers win. Like, who knows? Like, I don't even, we'll see. They're a young team,
Mm-hmm.
with the young QB, with the Niners defense, they should be able to swoop in on games like that. But I will say a memorable opening day game for me is the 49ers going into Pittsburgh. And I want to say it's Bubby Brister throwing like 4 or 5 picks, and Pittsburgh still beats the 49ers. There's I'll have to check, Football Reference. I'll have to go in Football Reference. I almost don't want to check because my memory is wrong. Then my memory's been lying to me for the last 30 years. But yeah, like that, like that's the thing. What I think of, who was after Neil O'Donnell? I think it's a quarterback before Neil O'Donnell. Was that Bubby
Was that
Brister?
Tommy Maddox?
Tommy Maddox from the XFL MVP, Tommy Maddox. I'm gonna see if I can find it on Pro Football Reference though. But yeah, like that's the game that I remember. Is this?
Yeah, but I'm of a similar mind as you. It's hard enough to pick like just straight up on on a weekly basis, but to try to pick the whole slate before the season is just it's bananas.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So from Robert, he said he heard a stat that the 49ers will have 5 games this season where their opponent has more rest than them. They will have 20 fewer days of rest this season, putting them last in the NFL. Is that a big deal to you or not?
I don't think it's a small deal. I mean, that's these games, the longer I watch, the more I realize that these games are won in the margins. And any advantage that you get like that, like rest is a big deal to these dudes. And I mean, like the Thursday games, like they don't even practice the week of a Thursday game. It's just it's just so much, it's maybe walkthrough, but most of it's just mental reps because you can't go out there and really do anything physical. Because like I know I heard George the other day was talking about on an interview is like he's like a zombie until like Wednesday or Thursday.
That's scary, isn't it? Isn't it
Yeah.
like scary to think about? Like, thank
Yeah.
God I'm not a football player.
Yeah, that they and people talk about the money they make, and I mean that's fine as far as it goes, but that is it's not a big deal that you're like as again referencing the Kittle interview. He's like, I'm in like 30 or 40 car wrecks,
It's crazy.
every Sunday. And then, like you said, by the, is by Wednesday or Thursday, he starts to feel like himself again. And that's when they're playing on a Sunday. But when they're playing on a Thursday, guess what? I mean, he's still got to strap up and go out there. But I mean, it's crazy to me that they still haven't expanded the roster so that if we're going to be playing these Thursday games, that you still only have 65 players, and then only 53 of those are eligible on on the week on the day of the game. It's just nuts. So yeah, but I mean it's here to stay, so we just have to deal with it, and we tell ourselves that they're safe and that both teams are doing it, so it's fair. But that to me that still doesn't make it any better. So the fact that we are on the short end of the stick, on the rest quotient is, I mean, I don't think it's not important. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Did find the game, by the way. It is the 1987 opener. The Niners lose, and this is a season in which they would go 13-2. Only 13-2 rather than 14-2 or 13-3 because there was the strike season. So there was a game where the Niners had to play with randos, but I think the NFL did skip a week that year because of the strike. So I Bubby Brister was much, many years after the guy that I was thinking of, and my mind did screw with me here because this guy threw 0 interceptions. It was Joe Montana who threw 3 interceptions in this game. Mark Malone.
Wow.
9 for 33 for 99 yards. Ernest Jackson ran for 103 yards, and they beat the Niners 30-17 to start a really good season for the Niners.
What season was that?
1987.
Wow, because Mark Malone, I remember him. He replaced Bradshaw.
Yeah,
that's a long time ago.
Steelers score on a fumble return, and then 1 touchdown pass from Mark Malone. And then it was Gary Anderson field goal, Gary Anderson field goal, Gary Anderson field goal, and then a Walter Abercrombie 28-yard rush. The Niners were not really in this game. They were down 17-3 at halftime. But that's the home opener against Pittsburgh that I remember. And who can forget 1984, the team that stops the Niners from going 16-0, the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Niners lose that game 20-17. Let's see if my memory reminds me here. I believe it was a last second, like no time on the clock field goal. I don't have that information, but yeah, Gary Anderson kicked a 21-yard field goal to win the game 20-17. Mark Malone, also the starting quarterback in that game and Montana did not have his greatest game. So I don't know, something about Pittsburgh for Joe.
Well, and Joe, that was his team growing up. So maybe, I don't know.
I think I now remember what that game was. I think Wershing shanked a field goal attempt as well, which is why they lost that game. That's what I remember. Because I remember having to blame somebody and blaming, got to blame Ray, man. Ray stopped us from going 16-0, but they won the Super Bowl, so who cares? All right, so let's talk about some of the other things that we wanted to chit chat. And I had this. Actually, save that. I want to talk about Steve Wilks, but this is a quick one. Super Bowl 60 comes to San Francisco. Now, was it the first season of Levi's when the Niners had the Super Bowl? First or second?
Yeah, I think I don't remember. I wasn't here at the time, so I don't remember. I don't have
not the greatest game. I think it was Carolina and Denver, maybe.
Yeah, that was the Cam game.
It's funny because the Niners not being in San Francisco, all of the Super Bowl happenings, from what I remember, happened in San Francisco. Because I remember going out because I work in the city, not going to the office as much now as I was back then. But all of the floats and the signage and these little events, they were all held in San Francisco.
And I mean,
games in Santa Clara.
No disrespect to my brethren down there in the South Bay, but I mean, if you had to pick, I mean, if you're gonna have things, and I know that the landscape in San Francisco has changed a lot in the past 7 years. So but yeah, it's still, to me, I know people down the city a lot, but I mean, it's still a cool place to go, and there's still a lot of cool things to do there.
Where does Roger Goodell want to wine and dine his partners and future partners? Is it on the Demon roller coaster at Great America, or is it at some fancy schmancy restaurant in
somewhere in Santana Row? Of course.
There you go. You can do Santana Row. You may have to shut down Santana Row, though. It gets
right.
packed. You just tell everyone,
crazy.
This week, NFL's paying all of our rent for the week, and no one can come hang out.
I've got this thing for the Container Store, and going to park there is it's a disaster. Also, there's never a good time to go there. It's always packed.
So I live in Sunnyvale now, but my wife and I, right before we got married and right after we got married, we lived at this tiny. It wasn't a. It's a small home for the San Jose suburb.
Hmm.
Uh, my daily walk, especially during the pandemic, I was right around the corner from Santana Row, so I walked through the Santana Row area just about every day, grab coffee and stuff,
Hmm.
and walk back. So I love Santana Row, but I know it is very busy, and the night could be fun, but the night could also be a little too much sometimes. So
And I love the South Bay, but I hate, coming from the East Bay. I hate 880 South. It's just it is the worst for me. And it seems like no matter what time I pick to go, it's always a damn parking lot. It's crazy. So yeah. But it's gonna be interesting. 2026, we got both the World Cup and the Super Bowl. So I mean that's gonna be really interesting. I really that's been my pet peeve, and I've been banging about it online. It just kills me that there's really nothing to like eat or drink right around the stadium. So when I go, I either have to, because I come in on the light rail.
yeah.
So for me to go into San Jose is like, going up and then coming back and then going back out. So either I have to do that or I have to wait till I get back to the East Bay to have a beer
No, here's the
and
thing.
dinner.
It's not even. There's no restaurants. It is you can't drive because the parking is so poor. The parking areas are so poor. And if you do have to drive and you don't park far enough to where you're out of the traffic, getting out of that place will
Right.
take you over an hour.
I hadn't thought about that part.
Oh my gosh. So I'm with you. This is what I do. I actually go backwards and then I jump on the light rail and then go to the game because it's the best way for me to go as
That
well.
makes sense. That makes
But
sense.
here's what I was gonna say. I know some people who have some season tickets. So if there's an opportunity where, they know a certain game is not going to be good for them, I'm going to look in to see if I can get us get us some tickets. And I think we need to go watch a game together, especially for the pod. Like we have to go for the pod. So
That'd be dope.
I'll
That'd be,
let you know because I know you're coming from a little further than me, so there has to be some planning
but
time.
it's yeah, but it's cool. I love coming in. When I did the training camp, I did both ways. I came in just right on the Capitol corridor. I did that once, and then Hayward Bart to Milpitas, to the light rail. If you're not tailgating, I tell everybody, taking the light rail or the
Yeah.
train is the
Yep.
way to do it. You hop
Absolutely.
right off. It's no fuss, no muss. You're right there at the gate. That's the way to go. I understand tailgating is the tailgating there is good. I've never partaken. That sounds cool. And they say their place there, they have some that like to sell tickets, so you just gotta roll up. And that sounds cool. But yeah, I would definitely love to do a game.
And there's other people who maybe if we can sort of figure it out and try and get other like Robert Ramos,
Mm-hmm.
who I've known since he was in diapers, and not only have I known him since he was in diapers, he and I both played in semi-pro baseball together after he got out of high school. So that's fun. But I know Robert goes to games, so we can try and get some people together. If we could get Shelvin out,
Yeah, I
I know
know, right?
Shelvin's very comfortable in Arizona. He's
I'm
in the
thinking
spot.
about maybe visiting Sheldon for that Cardinals game. I'm thinking I might try to get down there and play some golf.
That'll be a great.
Yeah, it'd be dope.
That'll be
Yeah,
great.
but
I,
I would
I
definitely love. I was thinking, Levi is just so expensive. I was thinking I was kind of targeting that Yucks game. That might be right kind of in my price in my price range. But
You know,
yeah.
I looked last year when the Niners were playing in Arizona because I always kind of look and see, you know, because I can go visit my parents, and I know my dad would like to check out Glendale.
Mhm.
Um, but the prices are up there for
Oh,
those games
really?
as well. Yeah, it was very similar to ticket prices for a Niner game to me at least. So
So
um,
what I love that whole stadium setup they've got down there. You talk about being able to go walk, and they've got that little um open air, that little food court
yep.
kind of situation right over there. You're talking about being able to go, imbibe, have a beer and a dinner, and um, right there, pre-game, post-game. That's the way I like to do it. So I'm hoping that
I've been to Glendale. I've been to that stadium once, but it was not for football. It was let me think about this. 13 years ago, WrestleMania 26 was in
oh, okay.
Arizona. So I took my boys out and we went to first we did spring training, so it would have been the 2010 season, so the year the Giants won the
So it was
World
an odd
Series.
season, so it was one that
Yeah,
they won.
so they won the World Series. We went to spring training, then we went to WrestleMania, and I was in spring training again earlier this year. Though the Giants are not, they don't look to be World Series contenders so far. But yeah, that'll be fun. We'll need to figure out how to get to a game together. I know we tried a little bit last year, but you know we can. If I think about it a little bit more, because my buddy sometimes in the chat, Randy, he's got tickets,
Hmm.
and then I know my ex-wife has access to somebody who has tickets, so we'll figure it out. We'll see if we can
Yeah,
make it
for
happen.
sure.
All right. So now to the Steve Wilks conversation. I sent you the note, Dave Lombardi. Now, I won't say that I always like Dave Lombardi's writing because sometimes you have to really embrace these crazy analytics in order for to read Dave's stuff, and he's really good at the analytics stuff. Like I get why he puts it in there. You know, Matt Barrows is more of a beat reporter, and Dave is kind of like a little bit more of an analyst. But he wrote a really good piece on Steve Wilks, and it had a little bit of an ode to Kyle's father, Mike Shanahan. And so the story is that when Kyle brought Wilks over, he could not take any of Wilks's guys. It was literally, it's just you. We have a great staff here, but we just lost our top guy. We're gonna put you into a situation that once you acclimate yourself, it's gonna be really great for you. And so Lombardi, he compared this to when Kyle's father, Mike Shanahan, came to the 49ers to be the offensive coordinator. I'm guessing it was when Holmgren would have gone to Green Bay.
Hmm.
That's what my memory says.
Hmm.
And basically, the ask, I mean, this is a crazy ask because but it's not like, you know, his own father didn't do it. But basically, Mike Shanahan came to the Bay Area a few months early, parked himself in a hotel, and watched all the tape of Bill Walsh's coaches meetings.
Hmm.
And so he could acclimate himself to the offense and how Bill did things. Now, this was a George Seifert run team at this point, but
But it was still Bill's
it
offense.
was still Bill's offense. And Bill, uh, I don't remember how closely he was to the organization, because I remember him doing TV, and then he went to do Notre Dame stuff, and then
Hmm.
you know. So, but anyways, the ask back then was, Mike, I know you got a family, brother, but we're going to need you to come early and study all of this stuff. So by the time the season starts, you know it better than these players know it. And so the ask of Wilks was sort of similar, which is, you know, we just need you to know this defense really, really well and soon, so that by the time the season comes, you know, you're ready to roll. So I thought this was a really good piece, and if anybody has an athletic subscription, definitely check it out. But the idea is like, the quote is, when it's not broke, you don't really want to try to fix it. We've had a lot of success around here, and we just want to continue to build on that. That was Kyle's quote for Steve.
Yeah. And I read that article, which was interesting, but then I started kind of studying Wilks, and that's why I don't know. I've said many times on this pod and other places that you always have to take what the coaches say with a grain of salt. I mean, because obviously transparency rarely serves them. So it's interesting, particularly the quote that I saw from him was talking about specifically man coverage and being more aggressive with the linebackers in pass rush, which is interesting because for a lot of reasons I found that interesting. Because one, when I looked at his resume, he runs a defense that's pretty similar to what we run. He when they don't run a lot of man. Neither one of those. When I looked, I was that neither one of us had a player in the top 75 of man snaps last year. We didn't play it. We were one of the most zone heavy teams in the league last year, and subsequently we had one of the best coverage units in the league, and again for a lot of reasons. And then Warner and Greenlaw are like statistically some of our best coverage dudes. So what you're telling me is we're going to be blitzing our best coverage guys. Our man coverage just isn't. We don't have anybody that's really good. Mooney's numbers were real good coming over from Kansas City, and Kansas City runs a lot of man coverage. But what I think what we saw last year is that Mooney, it's kind of different when you're the third or fourth corner playing a lot of man, and the coverage assignments that you have as the third or fourth corner in Kansas City, as opposed to playing man when you're the number one corner and the guys that you're covering. It's just different. It is going to be harder. There were times when we didn't get home and he was out there on that island, and like one that really comes back to me is DK Metcalf was like really cooking him last season. So I just, you couple that with the fact that none of our corners really have statistics. Our best man corner last year was E-Man before he got hurt, and so obviously he's gone. So I don't know. We'll see. But Wilks does a lot of zone blitzing. He does a lot of pattern match zone, which is basically what we did here. Our guy Ryan's, he's not a dummy. I mean, we didn't play a lot of man because we weren't very good at it. So I just don't see us again reinventing the wheel and becoming a man coverage team because we don't have the personnel to do it. It's just not something that we do well. I think his system, the way, in going back and looking at Carolina and Arizona, he's a perfect fit for what we do. And if you want to, we want to do a little bit more zone blitzing, that'll be great. I mean, I think that works out. But even under that, most of the time in Carolina and in Arizona, they played pattern match zone underneath. So it looks like man, but it really isn't. You pick up the man that comes into your zone. I'll have to see it to believe that we're going to become this, this man heavy coverage team. So, but I mean, it's nice to say in May that that's what we're gonna do. And I mean, come on, Kyle is not really very forthcoming as to what the hell we're gonna be running anyway. So if he's talking about, I told him I want us to run more man, I'm gonna go ahead and say that's a red herring.
Well, then here's the other thing, right? Is that he's specializes with DBs, and he specifically said he's going to be in the booth because that's what he wants to be able to see. Is he wants to see the DB stuff, and he also, he's got some influence there. he in the first the first pick for the Niners with Brown, and then also he was influential in the signing of Isaiah Oliver, who's the nickel back. So that you have a guy and he's got influence, and you want to maximize what he's good at,
Empower him, yeah.
and he comes in and he feels like he's got some say. So I like all of that stuff, and
Yeah.
it is that at the same time, though, I do think that there is some pressure there, right? Because you've got Bosa, you've got all of these players, you got great linebacker core, and it's like, okay, here's the expectation. Well, you got to be just as good as Ryan's was, because this defense cannot slow down, because it's a big part of what the 49ers do. So there's some pressure there for him too, to just come in and fit immediately and be a
And
difference immediately.
and Salah before that. I mean,
Yeah.
this is, excuse me, this is a and that's what I find interesting kind of about this as well, is that I would imagine that if things go well, he's here for a good time, not a long time.
Yeah,
I would
exactly.
imagine that he
That's the
is,
Niners coaches these days, right?
yeah. I
It's
mean, I would imagine that is, a lot. There was a lot of buzz about him. There were a lot of people who were upset that he didn't keep that Carolina job. So I would imagine that if things go well the way we expect them to go here, that he would be a candidate next coaching cycle for a head job. So,
yeah.
and I would imagine that would be his want, I would think. So I mean, it behooves everybody for him to be successful, and it seems like that defensive coordinator job now is it's a launching pad to a head coaching job, it would seem.
Yeah, for sure. All right, the last segment here, what we want to talk about at the end, have a little fun here. I was kind of talking a little historic 49ers in the beginning of this show, just because I've such a great recollection for those teams, and yet I can't remember a lot of stuff that just happened, this year. But there was a list that was out there that you had sent me about all-time 49ers top 10 players. Now, where did this list come from? The one that you sent me has Jerry at 1 and Joe at 2. Where did you find this list?
It was on Facebook. It was circulating around in the first week of May. It was popping pretty heavy, and I was in there banging away because I've got some real thoughts about this list. It's interesting to me that you talk about people and their recollections, and you can kind of, when you hear people making, or at least I could, when I was going back and forth with people in the groups, you can really tell when people started following this team based
Yeah.
on who they were champion. And because, like, for example, one of the big ones was, God bless Merton Hanks, top 10 for get out of here. I mean, honestly, Merton Hanks, to me, and I'll go down fighting on this. He's not even Eric Wright. Come on now. I mean, Merton was a good corner.
Yeah.
He served us well, but Eric Wright was a monster.
Yeah.
he was and listen to Ronnie Lott talk about Eric Wright. He was that dude for
Yep.
real. So he wasn't even better than him. And again, I know a lot of people, because I didn't know, like, Jimmy Johnson is on
Yeah.
there. I didn't know about him until the NFL 75. And people didn't throw the ball his way. He just didn't get, he was like one of the first shutdown corners where, nobody, they didn't even, quarterbacks didn't even look that way. So he's another one that 49er DBs talk about with a lot of reverence. So, I didn't see him play, but if Ronnie Lott says he's that dude,
Yeah.
then he's that dude as far as I'm concerned.
So there's a few of them out there, and the funny one is somebody asked Chat GPT to come up with a
Oh my
list.
goodness.
And look, it's very similar to the one that you sent me from. I think the one that you sent me is from some Instagram account, PFS something or other.
Mhm.
But both lists have the same top four, though they're jumbled a little bit. Do you have Jerry or do you have Joe number one?
For me, Jerry, I'm fond of saying, Jerry Rice is the best football player I've ever seen in cleats. So, I mean, he's on any list. And again, that it's interesting that comes up because that was always a debate me and my
Yeah.
uncle had.
Yeah.
Rest in peace. Was Jim Brown was his guy.
Speaking
He said
of,
he said he'd never seen anybody who was, he from that day till this was a better football player than Jim Brown. And I can't argue. I never got to see Jim Brown play. So Jerry's my guy. So
yeah. Me too.
So it's Jerry, and I mean it's Joe is my quarter. It's still, even with all that Brady has accomplished, Joe is still my quarterback.
Yeah.
And I mean, I understand that might be biased, because 7 is greater than 4, but Joe was 4-0.
Yeah. And
So,
he wasn't playing in a passing league like
oh yeah, I mean it was the his numbers. I just saw there was a video going around this week about his 89 playoff run. Wait, I mean he was just, it was peak Joe. I mean he didn't throw any picks. I mean it was his passer rating was something like 146 or something crazy like that. He was just, he was out of this world. And I mean, that was the great thing about Joe, was that the higher the stakes got, the better he got. So again, for me, that's my guy. But it's interesting that Chat GPT had their top 4 jumble, because mine was too.
Yeah.
From
So 3 and 4, and actually 5 are very similar. And 5 is the one that I have a problem with, but we'll talk about 3 and 4.
Yes.
It's Steve Young and Ronnie Lott, depending on I would put Lott in front of Young personally.
Yes.
Because Young had a fantastic career here, but Lott was really the foundation of helping kick off 81, and he was the best player on the defense when they won the Super Bowl.
I mean, how about, because I have not done this research, but I can't remember in all the years that I've been watching football anybody to be at all pro at all 3 defensive back positions: corner, strong safety, and free safety, which he did. So he was, literally the best defensive back in the league for a stretch of time. And I mean, he gets, and rightfully so, the highlight reel of Ronnie Lott is going to be hits, but he was a shutdown corner as well, which is, I mean, that's like a skill set that you rarely see. He was that dude. And yeah, for me, he's definitely number 3. No disrespect to Steve Young. I
Yeah,
mean, when you get to talking about the top 5 and top 10, they're going to be some good, very good players who are not on this list. And it's not that, I don't appreciate them, but I mean, when you start talking about, when you start delineating and parsing between the best of the best of the best, yeah, I mean, I just think Ronnie Lott, for me, is that guy.
And he had to reinvent himself 2 different times.
Yeah.
So number 5 is where I have a problem with, and it's I love this guy, but Dwight Clark isn't the 5th best 49er of all time. He is very valuable to the franchise. In 1981, he was an all-pro receiver, but his speed, because of injury, I want to make sure that I believe he had a knee injury, which really slowed him down. I feel like by 87 he was done. And that's not a very long career, but it's the catch, right? It's the catch.
Well, yeah, I mean, he is a part of the most iconic play in franchise history.
Yeah.
And I mean that is what it is, because I mean, if you are being real about it, by my count, he's like the fifth best receiver in franchise history. I go Rice, Gene Washington, um, for me, T.O., John Taylor, and then Dwight. That would be my top five. So 5 is a little high for Dwight
Yeah,
for me.
absolutely. I agree with you. I'd have to look at Gene Washington's numbers again to determine where I'd put them, but T.O. is definitely higher on this list than Dwight Clark. And then you get to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and there's a mix of Frank Gore, Patrick Willis, Bryant Young, BY. You mentioned Jimmy Johnson already, and there's Roger Craig, and then there's Terrell Owens. Those are kind of where things get bunched right there. But where would you have Mr. Terrell Owens?
Here's the thing. T.O. is, I don't care what you feel about him. He is on the Mount Rushmore. For me, he's on the Mount Rushmore of NFL receivers. It's Jerry, Moss, T.O., and then you can Fitz or Harrison. You can have whoever you want at 4. T.O. is definitely 3 in my book. And to me, in my opinion, 49er T.O. is the best version of T.O.
Way better
than anybody. So
all you gotta do is look at the stats. You want to know what the craziest thing about this is? The guy who he was most frustrated with, Jeff Garcia, he had better numbers with Jeff Garcia than any other quarterback, including Steve Young, because Steve Young caught him when it was baby T.O. By the time T.O. was T.O., Jeff Garcia was a quarterback. But you look at those numbers with him and Garcia versus him and Romo and him and McNabb, it's very clearly his best years were with Garcia as his QB.
So for me, it gets a little, because for me, he is. I have to acknowledge that. So for me, it was Rice, Montana, Lot Young. I forget how it went.
Did you go Willis, BY, Gore, Roger? I think those guys fit in that spot.
Yeah, I moved Dwight out of 5. I didn't touch Johnson. I just left him there at 6. So it was, because again, Bam Bam and Frank are like, Frank is probably, I say, Jerry is the greatest, Joe is the greatest quarterback, but I think Gore might be my favorite player. He might be my favorite 49er of all time. I just love that guy. And then the same with Patrick Willis. He was such a great player that, again, so he was right there. So for me, I think it was like, I put Gore ended up being replacing Clark, and then it was Johnson, and then it was Willis, then T.O. And then so for the last 2, the last 3, it was like, you could put, you could do that. T.O. was right, is there. T.O. was like 7. And then the last, 4, 8, 9, and 10, for my 8, 9, and 10 were like, this is spoiler alert for me. I had Bowman up there. He is, to me, he's a sneaky Hall of Famer. He's right there. Then you got BY, and then 10, it could be Clark, it could be Craig, it could be, 10, there's a lot of guys that if you were to, I'm not gonna die on that hill. If you tell me it's this guy, okay, it could be that guy. It could be Roger Craig. If you want to tell me it's the Dwight Clark, that's fine. I don't have much. I know Bowman is probably controversial. I just think his career, to me, he's a Hall of Famer. And it's you have to really go back and look at his numbers to see it. But it seems like Patrick is having a hard time getting in. So Bowman probably won't. But to me, he he's high, very high up there for me.
You know, if we ask my dad, he would say that Brody has to be on that list because that's the
Okay,
quarterback who he grew up
okay,
with, right?
okay, and
The
that's fair.
You know, the other thing about this is it's very hard to put offensive linemen on a list like this
Hmm.
because it's just hard. You don't have a lot of numbers to back up your information. Like someone like Randy Cross, who was an all-pro during the rise of the 49ers.
And
Like,
see, that's the thing though about that era of play. Because I mean, Randy Cross, you got Guy McIntyre, there were people who were stomping for Sapolo, but then it's like I love Jesse, but I mean, I don't think you could put him above McIntyre and Cross, and then Staley. What
yeah,
about
Staley.
Staley? And what about
And
Ian
people
St. Clair?
who
What
are
about
older than us would say Bob St. Clair has to be in the top 10.
yeah? So I mean, again, I can't. When you start, you go past like 75. I mean, I've done some research, but you go past that, like those Nomalini and
Yeah.
those kind of. I have no context for um for those guys. Joe Perry.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, you
If
look at Y.A. Tittle's passing stats and you're like, "Come on." But it's like a completely
right,
different game back
it's
then.
a complete. Well, we talk about that, but like the game that Joe played is completely
Yeah.
different than the game we play now. I mean, so
Joe's getting body slammed in games.
oh, I mean, exactly. And you want to talk about just receivers getting written down the field, and then also he played in an era where going across the middle was really a thing, where in a way that it's not now. It's
So
just
much so that Ricky Waters went across the middle and he was like, why am I gonna take this
for
hit in
who,
this game? For who,
for
for
what.
what?
This is one of the greatest quotes ever. But yeah, I mean that's just something that receivers these days. I was watching a highlight reel of Brian Dawkins, and it was like
Yeah.
every one of those hits
Yeah.
was 15 yards. He had like $500,000 worth of fines in that 2-minute clip. I mean, so it's just a completely different game.
Okay, so Roger Craig, historic, but also someone who always seems to miss the cut, just misses the cut in the Hall of Fame. First running back in history to have 1,000 yards receiving, 1,000 yards on the ground. Wendell Tyler, Wendell Tyler was a really good running back for the Niners. He ages out. Craig comes in. Offense gets better. You add Jerry Rice, and Roger Craig is kind of the forgotten man in that offense because of we're talking Rice and Montana, but he was such a big part of what they did. Like I don't know, I'm sure you could find another running back to catch the ball a little bit or whatever, but he was so perfect a
He
fit
was a
for
cheat
that
code.
offense.
He was a
And
cheat code.
I think current because of Gore and because we all love Frank. I'm with you. Frank is in my top 5 of favorite 49ers ever. But because of Frank, it's almost like Craig is a little bit forgotten, I would say.
Well, and I think there's a couple of things there because I had this argument too, not argument, just discussion. Because it's not like I'm arguing against Roger Craig. Roger Craig was an offensive player of the year. The thousand was a big thing, but the fact of the matter is, he had Jerry Rice and John Taylor on the outside. It's hard to double team a running back, a triple team a running back.
Yeah.
And the way that Bill Walsh used him to scheme him up, it was perfect. A lot of those flares out of the backfield, he was just open. I mean, it was just, and it was easy pitch and catch. And then he was a violent runner, and you can't take that away from him. But
Knocking people out with his knees.
right. But the difference to me between him and Frank is that he didn't. Frank, who was Frank's receivers that they were double? Frank carried this offense. I
Brandon
mean,
Lloyd he's not in that echelon
yeah,
of John Taylor.
no. So it was just different. The responsibilities of Frank Gore were just different than what they were for Roger Craig. Not and that again, like I say, we're talking about the best of the best. So I'm not saying that to denigrate Roger Craig. For me, it's just I have a much greater appreciation. Not that I don't appreciate what Roger Craig did, but what Frank did and what he gave to this offense was just it was otherworldly. And then when I was coaching, man, that was the guy that, I mean, I showed all the little kids. This is patience. You want to see patience and suddenness and balance and strength. Frank Gore to me was the perfect running back. I mean, I know he wasn't as complete a player as somebody like Roger Craig, but in terms of running the ball, I mean, he was just
didn't he tear up both knees in college?
yes.
My goodness.
In 18 months, 2 ACLs.
Crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy. I have this rule and I would say if a Frank Gore jersey came out, I would break this rule. And what this rule is that I don't generally wear jerseys unless they were players from my childhood. Yeah. And so, the jersey that I do have is a Jerry Rice jersey. He was from my childhood. There are two players I would break that rule for. One of them is if they came out with another Kaepernick 49ers jersey. And then Frank Gore. Those would be the two where I would break my own rule for.
That's my rule is similar. I don't wear jerseys for players who are younger than me.
Yeah.
But I broke the rule for the black cap jersey.
Yeah.
And Frank would probably be the one if I was gonna do that. I'll rock a lot jersey all day long.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But so definitely Frank would be my guy. If I was gonna wear one from a guy that's younger than me, it would definitely be Frank.
The only jerseys that I've had of late, I've always had a Rice jersey in some form. I had my parents make me, this was before the websites are all fancy now and you can do all this crazy stuff, but I don't even know where they found it, but they had to put together their own Garrison Hurst jersey for me.
Yes.
When I was in my early 20s.
Yes.
And then also I had the 1 year Dion was on the team. I had the Dion jersey from the throwback uniform, the red one. And yeah, those are mostly it. But like I said,
those were great times. Oh my gosh. Garrison Hurst is one of my favorite 49ers.
So
ever.
great.
He is awesome.
So great. All right. That was fun. So we'll be back in 2 weeks and we'll keep going. And I thought about bringing this up, but I knew we were going to have a long conversation. So we'll talk about this next time, but stuff about reinventing sort of Trey Lance's throwing motion so he doesn't get sore arms. Like that sounds kind of important to me so that our guy who throws lasers does not have an arm injury at some point. So I like that story. But we'll talk more about that stuff. We've been so Purdy and Trey and Jimmy heavy on this podcast because the quarterback is the number one star of the 49ers historically. But we'll talk more about that next week. I want it to be a little bit QB free on this version, but otherwise, we'll be back. So for Roderick and myself, we will be back in a couple weeks to talk to all of y'all. Thank you for hanging out with us. Peace out.